Hi kids! In this video, I'm going to go into more detail about the stitching method of building a sketchbook. Now, like I mentioned in the previous video, if you do decide to complete the stitching method, you are going to glue in the end, but you are going to stitch together your packets first. And this is more like technical bookbinding. The great thing about this is that this style of sketchbook will last a little bit longer than the glued version of a sketchbook because the pages are separated, stitched together, glued, and bound with a cover. So if we take a look at my packets of paper that I have, like I mentioned in the previous video, I have 15 sets of 3 pieces of paper folded in half. You can see right here where I've punched my holes using my push pin, and you'll notice that not all of them are perfectly in a line, and that's okay, because realistically, the only thing that I need to focus on at this stage is looping my thread through my 2 holes and tying it so that my packets of paper stay together. Once I glue them, they're going to be pinched together, glued shut, and then the binding, or excuse me, the edge of the book will then hold them together even more. So we're going to actually do a double bind. So I like to stitch these together because then, like I mentioned, it becomes more like an actual book and the pages fold like an actual book. So I'm going to go into a little more detail, like I said, of how to thread your needle, thread it through your holes, measure, and make sure that your packets are ready to go. So I have about 3 more packets that need to be punched, and then we need to start stitching these together. When you're done with them, each little packet will start to look like this. And then when you hold them together, you'll notice a whole bunch of lines across the top. So what I need to do first is I need to measure the inside. Now I showed you this very quickly in the very first video, but I'm going to go into a little more detail here with this. Now, it's very important if you are doing the stitch method that you are looking at where the line is, you are looking at where your marks are, and that you're making sure your ruler is in the same place every single time you go to mark your 2 inches from the outside. So you really have to make sure that you're watching where you place your ruler. Measuring with this technique is very important. The way that I got my lines or my holes to be in line is through placing my ruler in the same place every single time and measuring on the same line every single time. So realistically, if you place your ruler in the correct place, mark it, your lines and your book little packets will always be even and in a straight line. So I'm going to place my ruler close to the edge, and I'm going to zoom in on this so you can see. So I am placing my ruler not to the edge like this, so that I have the little dot right there. I am placing it right on the very first line of the inch. Now I also like to take my paper and fold it up a little bit so that I can see where the ruler is in relationship to the bend in my papers. So I like to kind of press it to the top of the paper, fold my paper down, then I slowly slide the ruler down just a little bit so that now I have a little bit of space to work with. Now I know that I want to bring my dot in, or my first stitch, 2 inches in and 2 inches in. So I'm going to be stitching from the 2 to the 7. I like to use a mechanical pencil for this because it has a really nice fine point that can make a really nice mark so that when I push my push pin in, it's in the correct spot. So I like to make a little dash on the 2, and then I'll come in from the 9, 1, 2, make a little dash right there. And I do the same thing for every single one of my packets. Now I don't pick these up and I don't move them after I've made my marks. My next step is to then grab my push pin, and I want to keep my papers in line exactly where they are. I'm going to kind of test to see where the fold is. I like to place my push pin right on that dot or the little dash, right in the seam or the bend. So I don't want to put it at the top of this little dash that I've made or at the bottom of this little dash. I want it to be right in the fold. So to do that, I really want to make sure I'm placing my push pin in the fold. Once I have it in that fold, I'm going to press. Now I'm using a cutting mat. That's what's underneath my folded papers. You don't want to do this on a surface that can scratch or a surface that can get damaged, because if you look, I'm pushing the push pin directly into that cutting mat. Now this is made for cutting with knives using push pins. It's a protective mat to keep your surfaces intact. If you have a piece of cardboard that you can put underneath this, that would be perfect because you'll be able to go through your paper and into the cardboard without damaging the surface. So once I do that, I'm going to go to my second dash here. Again, I like to just double check, kind of give that a fold, press this in. And again, I'm pushing till I make sure that it goes all the way through. And I fold like that. Now I also like to double check that my push pin made it all the way through. I kind of give my paper a slight bend, and I take my push pin and I just very gently at this point kind of wiggle it right through that. A little tiny wiggle right through. This is just an extra step I like to do so that when I thread my needle through, I do this so that when I thread my needle through, I don't have to use the needle to clean the hole. There we go. So I would do this, and then my next step is to take my needle and thread, and I already have this threaded and ready to go. And I don't tie a knot at the edge of my thread because I'm going to tie the entire thing in a knot. So I don't want to have a double knot. I want this to lay as flat as possible, so that's why I leave the thread unknotted at the end. So I'm going to go through the back of these folds right here. So just like that, right through. I'm going to catch my needle on the other side. And I'm just going to very gently pull this through because I don't want my thread to get all tangled. Very gently go right through. And then I like to leave about 3 inches or so, maybe a little bit longer. I like to leave that there. And then I tend to fold it this way so I can make a little pinch or kind of hang on to it, flip it over. I'm going to go right through this other hole here. I want to make sure my papers are evenly stacked. And at this point, if I have to kind of place this down, I can. But now I'm going to place my needle right through that so you can see, just making sure that it's right in the fold. And I know that the edge of my thread is right underneath here, so I also like to kind of hold this down a little bit so that I can take my thread and pull that right through there. So now I've got this really nice threaded line right there. Now I like to kind of pop this open so I can lay this flat so that I know that the inside of my thread is really pulled tight and there's not going to be any loose kind of threads, because you really want to make sure that this is pulled tight so that it holds your papers in place. Now I like to kind of fold this over, and I like to tie this either closer to one end or closer to the middle, but it's really up to you as long as it's tied and secure. You also want to make sure that it's not super loose like this. You don't want a lot of loose thread. So you do have to kind of pull this a little tight. However, you do not want to pull this so tight that it rips the two holes and starts to pull your paper towards the center, because then what it's going to cause it to do is it's going to cause your paper to buckle. And that's going to, the tension from your thread being pulled really tight will start to make your paper fold like this. And you don't want that. So you want it tight enough to hold your papers in place, but not so tight that you make your papers buckle. So now what I like to do when I tie my knot, especially if you're working on your own, if you have somebody there to help you, all they have to do is kind of put their finger right here, help you tie a knot, and pull that so that it stays rather tight. But because I'm working by myself, I like to kind of give this a little twist. I like to place my finger right on the twist. And then I keep my finger there. And I'm going to use my two fingers to pinch the thread so that it stays put. So I have a little loop like this. Now I need to bring this extra right through here. And again, be patient with this. The more patience you have, the better. So not only am I teaching you art, but I'm also teaching you the skill of patience. Okay. I'm going to grab my thread. And you'll see I have my little knot right there. So see that little loop? You can kind of see how the threads are overlapped like that. This was the thread that was pinched between my fingers. And I'm just going to slightly pull this. Just like that. And there we go. Now it is tight enough to hold my papers together, but not too tight that my papers are going to buckle. Then I'm going to take my scissors and I want to make sure that I don't cut the extra thread off too short. But I also don't need to leave so much because that will add bulk to the seam. And now I have a nice little knot, a little bit of excess thread, and I have my 3 bound pieces of paper. Once they're all stacked together and tied, you'll see that you'll start to see like a little black line here. This is just the threads all in the same spot. Once you get them all stacked together and all threaded together, they'll be super secure. And then you can add your binder clips. Let me zoom out a little bit for you. There we go. So once you have them all threaded, you'll see it's going to be completely thread right here, all in the center of your book. And then you'll add your binder clips. I like to add them as close to the seam as possible here. And like I said, I use a slightly bigger binder clip than the one that I showed in the previous demonstration. I like to put one there. And then I also put another one right here. And then I will glue the inside center right here. If you'd like to, you can also kind of pull these towards the edge. Again, making sure that your papers are all even. Pull these towards the edge. And if you want to have your center pinched, you can go right over the threads in the center there, glue these threads here, glue the papers here, and that will secure your book. And that is how you will do the detailed stitch method for your sketchbook.